Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Steel News podcast. I'm Brennan McGrevy here with Braden from Bengals_NFL. Braden, the Bengals and Steelers classic AFC North rivalry, 34-11. What went wrong for Cincinnati today?
Well, I think we have to start with Jake Browning. He may have thrown for, I believe it was 313 yards, but he also threw three interceptions. And against a team like the Steelers, who have a really strong defense, the last thing you want to do is play from behind, especially the way Jake Browning was performing. And the offensive line gave absolutely no help. As usual, a classic thing in Bengals Steelers game is TJ Watt just eating up the Bengals offensive line. The Jake Browning struggling as it is. Offensive line gained no help, and Bengals love making Steelers backup quarterbacks looking great. Mason Rudolph had a field day. The Bengals got out coached. They were dropping their edge rushers in coverage, not being able to produce pressure on an already injured defensive line, and just it was countless mistakes by the Bengals that the Steelers were properly able to capitalize on.
Absolutely. And you look at Jake Browning, who stepped up big time for Joe Burrow, beating the Vikings. I believe it was the week before. He's had some really good performances. I think this one, just some growing pains, especially playing at this level in the NFL. It's hard. But you look at the receiving core, T. Higgins had 5 catches for 140 yards and a touchdown, and George Pickens had 4 catches for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. Both these receivers had a clinic today in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we saw both secondaries just completely crash, missing simple tackles. We just saw the simplest mistakes in coverage, especially on these medium deep routes, can break the game. And for a few moments there, that play to T. Higgins gave the Bengals a little bit of hope. But when the Steelers respond with a big play to Pickett, who, like you said, had a big one in the first half, having 2 touchdowns. That's just a recipe for disaster. So outside that touchdown drive, yeah, the Bengals got a field goal. But outside that Higgins plays, they weren't able to get anything going down the field except for a pass here and there. They weren't able to get drives. So they weren't able to do that. The Steelers were. They were able to get it to George Pickens. They were able to get it to Johnson a few times. And Steelers being able to use their steel receivers and the Bengals not being able to capitalize with their talent on offense was another huge factor. And I'm sure it's nice in Pittsburgh to see George Pickens have this type of game as he has, because there's no doubt the talent has been there for him. It seems like there's been a few character issues, but he really showed his talent this week.
Absolutely. After that Colts game where he wasn't blocking for his running backs, this week we saw Jaylen Warren have an awesome block on, I can't remember what Bengals defender it was, but, that's, character issues. Mike Tomlin, he finds a way to take these receivers, Antonio Brown, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, some other guys who've had some problems and issues, Martavis Bryant, and make them into really good players. But you look at this Bengals team, and they're missing Jamar Chase, one of their best player on offense. Joe Burrow as well. It's hurting for this team. The LSU combo is deadly, and they're really good. And I have the utmost respect for them. They're really good players. And the Steelers were down 4 safeties with DeMonte KZ being suspended, Minka Fitzpatrick being injured, and some more players being injured. So they had to move Patrick Peterson from corner to play safety and take Eric Rowe off the practice squad, former Patriot and Dolphins player, I believe, and put him in at safety, and he stepped up big time. But the Bengals played, for what they were dealt, I feel like they did underplay a little bit, but T. Higgins played a lot. He did all he could. He had a phenomenal game himself. And Mike Hilton, a former Steelers player, I miss him a lot, but he's a really good player for your guys' team. And you guys have a really good future, especially, this AFC North is just getting better. Every team looks really good, with Baltimore probably going to win the division, and Cleveland has been bad for so long, with Myles Garrett being really good. This is an awesome division, and it's good seeing, these new young talents come in. And it sucks to see older guys go, like Big Ben and Antonio Brown, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco. I mean, Joe Flacco's back on the Browns, which is cool, but, it was interesting to see. But this Bengals team, they have a really tough schedule coming up. They play at Kansas City on New Year's Eve at 4:25. That's a tough game, but the Chiefs have been struggling. They did have some tough games. They let me pull it up here. They lost to. They lost to the Packers. Wait, no, hold on, that's wrong there. They've had some losses. I can't pull up exactly what they had, but they have some tough games coming up. And then believe you guys also still have to play the Browns again, who's a really, really good team with Myles Garrett, and Joe Flacco's playing elite football. So where do you think the Bengals are going to finish on the season record wise?
I think they're probably losing these next two games, especially if the Browns are fighting for the division. If there's a scenario where that happens, I just think despite some of the Chiefs' struggles, Jake Browning will not be able to keep up with Patrick Mahomes, especially if the Bengals defense plays similarly to how they did today. And then we saw what happens to the Bengals offensive line multiple times this year when they have to go up against an elite edge rusher. The whole line doesn't even need to be dominant, but if they just have one elite defender, which the Browns obviously do with Myles Garrett, similar to how TJ Watt dominated the Bengals offensive line, they just are never able to succeed. And we've seen that in outside the division as well. We could like the Packers, excuse me, not the Packers, the Cowboys last year, Micah Parsons completely destroyed the offensive line. So it's just a repeating pattern. And when it is, that needs to be discussed about the coaches and their effectiveness. But because of that, I just don't see the Bengals winning. But as we know, it is Joe Flacco. He is old. While he has performed well lately, defenses are eventually going to adjust. And I think while he may not play at a Jake Browning level like he did today, those stats he's putting up may not be consistent. He may be making more mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah. This Bengals team, anything can happen. The Steelers had a really tough stretch where they lost back-to-back weeks against two-win teams in the Cardinals and Patriots, and then they had a tough game against the Colts. But this year has just been crazy for the NFL. There's like only a select few teams that are really, really good because most of it's even. I mean, there's a few teams at the bottom like the Patriots, Cardinals, and Panthers, but you have these really good teams. All in the AFC. It's such a competitive conference overall. But you take a look at the Steelers' upcoming schedule, and New Year's Eve they play the Seattle Seahawks, who recently just came off a big win against the Philadelphia Eagles. Drew Lock played phenomenal. Shout out to the Seattle QB coach who's been working with Geno Smith and Drew Lock. And that was a hype game to watch. I was rooting for them. I like the Seahawks. And then the Steelers go and play at Baltimore Sunday, January 7th, with a time to be determined. Where do you think the Steelers finished this year? They beat the Ravens earlier this year, but they lost to two-win teams. Where do you think they finish?
Yeah, so I think against the Seahawks, I think that is a win. I think unlike last time, the Steelers coming kind of having those two strong performances and struggling again, I think they may find their groove here. Like George Pickens, that wasn't obviously he's been helped developed coaching wise, but he had a dominant performance. And no matter who you're playing against, that is going to be a game changer. And I really don't believe, given how we've seen Pickens' talent, even if it's inconsistent, he's starting to find his groove, and that's really going to make Seattle panic. It's going to make them respect him. And then the Steelers, kind of like we saw today, they can just establish a run game. It doesn't have to be anything overly dominant. The statistics don't need to be like, great, but as long as you can just get those 4 or 5 yards per carry, and if you're able to pass it down, keep the defense guessing like they did to the Bengals today, I think they will find success. And against the Ravens, that's a really hard one to predict. If it's starters versus starters, I think I would have to predict with the Ravens. But if it's another situation where if the Ravens have the division clinch and they bench their starters, and no matter what happens next week in Seattle, Steelers will be fighting for a playoff spot that final week. So if it's a situation backup versus starters, I could definitely see the Steelers win, and that would be my prediction. But like I said, if it's starter versus starter, I would have to go with the Ravens.
Absolutely. That Ravens team is stacked. And I would like to say, Lamar does struggle against Pittsburgh. His QBR is, I believe, a 66.8 or 5 or something like that. He's struggled, but this Ravens team this year, they're dangerous, man, And I respect, a really good competitive AFC North. And, you know, a thing that's really been a component is injuries. You look at the Browns, who were losing or lost to Deshaun Watson, who now have Joe Flacco playing. The Bengals with Joe Burrow out for the season, with Jake Browning playing. Kenny Pickett, who's been in and out with concussion and ankles things going on, with Mitch Trubisky, who's one of the most overpaid QBs in the league, and Mason Rudolph coming in and playing a phenomenal game. And I think a key part of that is Mason sitting behind Big Ben for so many years. He's been on the Steelers team for a long time, sitting behind Big Ben and Kenny Pickett, and who even Devlin Hodges, when Duck Hodges, Steelers legend, who played for a little while there. But you know, it's all about development. I think Jake Browning this year, even if he gets his stuff back together these next weeks, even if the Bengals lose and he plays good, I could see other NFL teams being like, we want him, because obviously, Joe Burrow's the Bengals guy, but Jake Browning will probably want to go somewhere and play. Hopefully, if he keeps playing this good, or maybe, the Bengals can find a way to get him back under contract. But like you were saying before, let's talk about, his inconsistencies. How can Jake Browning clean him up? Because he's played some phenomenal ball, but he started to kind of fall off a little bit, and we saw that tonight.
Yeah, so he only still has a few games under his belt. He's only started a few and a half games, so the inconsistencies are expected. He's still getting his feet wet. Steelers have definitely been, I would say, the best defense he has had to play against this year. So now that he's had some tape, he's had some wins. Now he knows, has a full on bad game. It's hard to read much value the way he performed against the Ravens. So maybe what he needs to do is learn from his mistakes from this game. That's obviously easier said than done, because, like you said, he's shown the ability to make good throws, to go off script, plays that not every quarterback could make. So the talent's there, but again, if he just keeps making those mistakes, if he's not learning, then this team's not good enough, even with Jamar Chase back, to cover up those mistakes, and that he may be good enough to get them into the playoffs. Well, if this loss today, that's a lot more difficult. But at the moment Joe Burrow went down, the Bengals, the idea of them being a Super Bowl contender went out on the drain, just because Joe Burrow is that guy. And
Absolutely.
Jake Brown has those inconsistencies. So if the Bengals want any hope, he needs to clean up, make less mistakes, learn from his experience. But he's about to go up against two really good defenses. So if the offensive line doesn't give him any favors again, I expect these struggles to continue.
Yeah, and I think what's being asked of him, I think he's gone above and beyond, because being a backup QB in this league and coming in with guys who maybe you didn't have as many reps with, because Joe Burrow's the guy in Cincinnati, and they're really dangerous. When Joe Burrow's in there, he's definitely one of the most valuable players on that team, as well with Jamar Chase, with that chemistry. And Jake Browning, he's really, really solid player, but we saw two backup QBs play today, and Jake Browning, really, really solid guy, but we haven't seen Mason Rudolph. I mean, he's played some games for the Steelers before, but this might be by far, I think, the best Mason Rudolph game I've played. Just overall, no interceptions, no fumbles by him, almost 300 passing yards, 2 touchdowns. Where do you think this Mason Rudolph came from? Because he didn't have that many reps with the Steelers starting team. It was Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky.
I think it was a factor of a few things. I think one, not having any tape on Rudolph, or very minimal, certainly worked in the Steelers' favor. I think another part is the Steelers just completely outcoached Lou Anarumo and that Bengals defense. They were seeing receivers wide open, saw a lot of pick plays, a lot of fake out screens that turn into wheel routes, just being able to get the receivers open. And Rudolph he made the throws he had to. He didn't try and overcomplicate things. He made smart decisions. And I just think because he was being smart, he wasn't trying to overdo anything. He let the Steelers' talent do some of the work for him. And because of that, I think he was able to control the game and dominate this Bengals defense.
Absolutely. Coaching was a thing that was talked about in Pittsburgh a lot this season. Matt Canada, everyone wanted him out, and then There was a CBS graphic that showed. I mean, yes, granted, they did have that 400-yard game against Cincinnati. I believe it was the first game this season against Cincinnati for Pittsburgh is when what's his name? Excuse me. The Steelers offense got over 400 yards, but and it was tough. But then the Steelers kind of went on a downward spiral, a 3-game losing streak after beating Cincinnati, and then they play Cincinnati again and get a win. So you wonder if it's maybe a Cincinnati Bengals thing, or if it's the Steelers are back on the rise, which would be awesome to see in this competitive AFC North. But regardless, George Pickens played a phenomenal game. Even though he did have almost 200 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, he still has to block and still be a team player because he can't always do that every game. That's what makes you a great player. You don't always get the stats, but you do stuff to get the win. So I'd love to see him make some great blocks in the future, but a great game by him. And Evan McPherson and Chris Boswell, I know those are kickers. They don't get talked about a lot, but 2 of the best kickers in the league. Evan McPherson came on the rise, was clutch for Cincinnati in his first few years. He's still a young guy. Actually, I know a guy who has actually met Evan McPherson at a camp in Florida, and they hung out and stuff like a camp, and it was sweet. He taught him some things, so that was really awesome. And Chris Boswell, had a 50-yard field goal this week, and he had a missed extra point last week, but this week he's 4 for 4. Back to the Chris Boswell we know. And yeah, this was a really, really good game, but it's tough. And you look at even tonight's matchup, they got the Bills and Chargers. I mean, I know the Chargers aren't as great of a team, but the Bills are still trying to claw their way into the playoffs and maintain that. With that big win they had, that's who beat the Chiefs when I misspoke earlier. And the Chiefs are a good team, but they can be beat. So I do think Cincinnati could beat the Chiefs. I know it's a rivalry when it's Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes, and now it's Jake Browning, and the Bengals will be underdogs, but the Bengals could very well win that game because the Chiefs receivers have been struggling. Kadarius Toney's had some drops. Travis Kelce's getting all the attention with no Tyreek Hill in the picture. And, Mahomes, he's a great quarterback, the best in the league. Maybe not this year, but usually he's the best quarterback that any team would want. But anything can happen any given Sunday. This Bengals team can definitely beat them, and you guys have a really, really good team. But yeah.
Yeah, Jake Browning plays kind of like how he did against the Jaguars and against the Vikings like he did last week. There's definitely a chance if he just does what he has to do, if he doesn't throw 3 interceptions, if he instead just takes the throwaway instead of trying to get sacked for 15 yards, because we kind of saw him just roaming around trying to extend plays, keep running back, throw it up, then giving it right to the Steelers defenders. Like I said, taking advantage. Instead of doing that, if he just throws it away, or if he just takes the catch, if he just takes the catch down, check down. Words are hard
Yeah.
apparently. Instead of trying to fit it into a tight window of 2 defenders, they certainly have a chance because, like you said, they certainly have the talent to do so. The Chiefs have not looked like the team we saw last year, but the question is, can he be consistent with it, or will he come out looking really struggling again?
Yeah, that'll be key. This NFL season has been so unpredictable. In this game, the Steelers and Bengals, the Steelers had a really good first half, but Cincinnati had a better third quarter than Pittsburgh. They scored 11, with Pittsburgh only scoring 7. So Cincinnati did have a really good answer in the third quarter, better than they had for most of the game. But it's any given Sunday, and this NFL season has been chaotic. A lot of injuries, a lot of quarterback injuries, which you hate to see. Especially one of my favorites, Kirk Cousins, went down, for the Vikings. Former Steelers player Joshua Dobbs, I thought he was their answer, but, that was only short time lived. Now they got Nick Mullins in there, but, this NFL season's been so unpredictable. And, I think in the matchup, looking at it today between the Steelers and Bengals, when this Steelers team gets going, they're a dangerous team, but the Cincinnati team, the injury bug has bitten them a lot, especially at the quarterback position. You're missing their star wide receiver in Jamar Chase, but you do have some elite players still with depth. T. Higgins, when his contract comes up, you wonder how much he'll be asking for. Tyler Boyd, I like him, he's a Pittsburgh native guy, Pennsylvania guy. And Joe Mixon, the running game for Cincinnati it was not great there. They used Chase Brown, who did decent, but Mixon didn't play as great of a game on the ground, which I think would have helped Browning out a lot more. But this offensive line for Cincinnati, got eaten up by the Steelers defense, and the Steelers had 3 sacks on the day and 3 interceptions. Alex Highsmith, one of the guys who got the game balls, had a sack and a pick, big time player. And the Cincinnati team as well was able to get a sack with Trey Hendrickson. I believe I said his name right. He's a big player for you guys' team. And Logan Wilson, again, total tackles led the team with 11 today as well. So anything can happen, and it's a big season for both these teams because there's a lot of growing pains still, like really, really young teams. There's not a lot of as many vets. I know the Steelers have Cam Hayward, but they just, Big Ben left, and the Bengals don't have as many vets on the team as they maybe would like. But regardless, the talent's there. It's just a matter of time to see if this coaching staffs can get it right.
Yeah, and the Bengals coaching staff has the fans have split opinion on Zach Taylor and staff. Usually their opinion of him change every other week. Sometimes they think he's coach of the year. Sometimes they think he's Adam Gase times two. But for the most part, yeah, coaching does matter. A lot of people kind of made the Bengals Charger comparison in the backup quarterbacks, and when I saw that, I didn't think that was Burrow versus Herbert. I thought that was Brandon Staley versus Zach Taylor. Obviously, that's a very low bar. Brandon Staley, the worst head coach this year in the NFL. But
Without
I
a
think
doubt.
what we did see from Browning, I do think that shows an impression of Zach Taylor's coaching ability. He was a quarterbacks coach before come to Cincinnati. So we have certainly seen Zach Taylor come to some bright moments, especially against the Chiefs. While the offense played really well in those multiple comebacks from a few years ago, that also doesn't happen with bad coaching. If you have Adam Gase, Brandon Staley at that helm, even with that talent, that team probably does not come back. Now, I definitely don't think Taylor's great head coach, but I think he may get more heat than he deserves. I think he definitely has the ability to coach a win next week. Obviously, Andy Reid, that's really challenging, but like you said, any given Sunday, weapon wise, they have the talent. Browning has shown the ability to have really strong performances. So it's definitely not a Big Ten versus MAC situation where there's an obvious winner. I don't think it's going to be a give me for the Chiefs. I think the Bengals will be competitive, but I do think between the quarterback difference and the Bengals defense, what they showed today, and versus what they'll be playing next week, I just don't envision them winning this game.
Yeah, and it's tough. Like you said, Zach Taylor fans have split opinions, but him and that coaching staff have done wonders in Cincinnati. They made them this team that was kind of the laughing stock of the NFL. Joe Burrow's first year, he got hurt, unfortunately, and missed some time, but they came around. They went to the Super Bowl against the Rams. I mean, granted, the Rams won, and you guys were just offensive line away from that Jamar Chase touchdown to, like, take the lead and probably win that game. It sucks, and coming from a Steelers fan, their line has been pretty bad for a while, but even the Chiefs offensive line was bad for a while. You saw in that 49ers Chiefs Super Bowl a little while ago. So offensive line is definitely one of the most important positions in football, top 3 most important position without a doubt. But you talk about, coaches and people having mixed opinions. A name that's been coming up, even Ryan Clark has been saying, Mike Tomlin, fans in Pittsburgh have been split. Saying he won the Super Bowl, Bill Cowher's team. He's 8-9 in the playoffs. Where do you stand with Mike Tomlin? I know you're a Bengals fan, but thinking from, unbiased standpoint, if you can, where do you think about Mike Tomlin? Because I think a lot of other teams would be lining up to hire him as a head coach.
He's a top 3 head coach in the NFL, I think. And I think I know he's going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. I think the ending of the Steelers season will be very telling. On one hand, sometimes your time is just done. He's had a very successful career in Pittsburgh, undoubtedly, and sometimes the best decision is to move on. It's just best for your career, change of scenery. But if he gets the Steelers to a positive record again, if he's able to do that going through 3 quarterbacks, then I think that's a signal he still has room to improve and there's still a chance for Pittsburgh to keep growing, be a legitimate playoff threat and maybe Super Bowl threat down the road. So I think it's going to be telling. But if he finishes the year under 500, then it may be best for both sides to move on, especially with no bad blood, no firing. So he said, I'm personally, I don't root for guys to lose their job, despite I don't like playing against Tomlin, but
Right.
I have so much respect for him as a football head coach. If I had to make a prediction, if it was up to me, I would probably keep him in Pittsburgh.
I agree. And, for a while, I may have had some overreactions on my account, after games. Anger can sometimes get the best of somebody. But like you said, Tomlin, us Steelers fans have been spoiled, man. We haven't finished last in the division since 1988. We've had 3 head coaches since like the 1960s, I believe it is, with Chuck Noll, Bill Cowher, Mike Tomlin, all Hall of Fame head coaches. Um, and it's tough, because you look at someone like Andy Reid had a Hall of Fame career with the Eagles, and then his time came up, and now he's with the Chiefs. Another Hall of Fame career over there. He's made his case, and I think we're lucky to have Tomlin. You have to think about who's around him. Hiring within isn't always great. You want to get guys from the outside. I wish Pittsburgh would have kept Brian Flores and maybe moved him up as the defensive coordinator and got rid of Terrell Austin. I know a lot of fans agree with that. Matt Canada, I think his time was up, even if the Steelers kept going down. I think Canada definitely was a problem, so the Steelers did need to get rid of him. But it'll be interesting to see the Steelers try to get long-term as their offensive coordinator. Right now, they have the intern with Mike Sullivan and Eddie Faulkner, the running back coach, QB coach. So it'll be telling. But, well, to wrap up this video, or podcast, excuse me, I always ask somebody who their favorite player is on their team, and you're a Bengals fan, so I'm going to ask, who's your all-time favorite Bengals player, and who's your favorite current Bengals player?
All-time favorite, I think I definitely have to go with AJ Green. The Bengals drafted him when I was back in 4th grade. He had a big. I always played football. He made me want to play wide receiver. I always wore 18. He was just kind of a role model to me, especially the way he acted off the field. With the exception of the Jalen Ramsey incident, I can't name one time where he was really a bad influence at all. And current favorite, I feel like everybody can guess, but it is Joe Burrow. I think what he's done since college has been amazing. Just the leadership he's had on the Bengals. I think most of these posts have been in joking fashion, but I think any thought of Burrow being a system quarterback with Browning stats as an argument have been eliminated after today. He's just an
Absolutely.
amazing guy, an amazing quarterback. So he's definitely my favorite, I have to say, currently.
I respect that, man. I actually grew up from Ohio, so I always saw a bunch of AJ Green jerseys. I have the utmost respect for him. He's on the Pat McAfee show sometimes, and he'll talk about the Steelers, and he has a lot of good things to say about Mike Tomlin and, George Pickens' off the field behavioral problems. But he's an awesome guy, and I have the utmost respect. And Joe Burrow, I loved watching that LSU team, with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase was insane. That's on a team, and Clyde's Edwards-Helaire, the Chiefs running back. He's more like a second or third string running back now, but it was an elite team regardless. And it was great having you on the show, Braden. Guys, make sure to go check him out on his Instagram. It is Bengals_NFL. Thank you guys for tuning in. This has been episode 2, Brennan with the Steel News. Love y'all. Take care and have a happy holiday.